an art critic, but I have known Terri for over 2 decades, and I've admired and studied her brilliance for just as long. And also, and perhaps more crucially, I have a very high threshold for embarrassment. I'm not really shy, and to be very honest, I quite like attention, so if you'll bear with me, I'd like to gush just a little bit about how much I love this work. So, over the last 6 or so years, I've watched Terri really grow as a painter. I've watched her romance with detail, with the intricacies of realist painting, catch up to her intuitive compositional talent. And it has been thrilling, and I think you can feel the thrill of that in this series. What some of you may not know is that this series in particular marks a huge representational leap, I think, for her. Before Rowan, she seemed most comfortable to me in painting interior landscapes, so really beautiful, magnetic, energetic compositions that find order and meaning in chaos, the mess of everyday objects and scenes. The leap that Terri has made here is into portraiture, into figurative art, into painting people and faces, or one person and one face that changes and grows as the series progresses. 2 people come into their own here. Rowan, Terri's son, and Terri as a painter. The quiet, muted intimacy of a baby's and mother's early days together give way to more color, more richness, more pattern, and more of the figure as we are learning to be in the world again, to see the world again. I love the whimsy that emerges at the sort of chronological end of this series in paintings like Almost Two and Red Kitchen, which brings back the gorgeous chaos of Terri's earlier interior landscape paintings with an even richer, brighter palette than before, with an even more dramatic and playful sense of the animating power of light and of mess. When Terri began this series, I have to confess that I was nervous. I think I've always connected very deeply to her work, but I think unlike a lot of people in this room, I'm not a maternal person. I don't have a child, I don't want one. I've never been very interested in children. I really don't like it that much, no. But intellectually, I do understand the power of having breastfeeding represented here, how radical it is to depict this invisible and yet deeply embodied, profoundly physical, tremendously time-consuming, and tiring parental labor in traditional realist painting. I worried, though, that being so far from my personal experience and from any experience I desire for myself, it wouldn't really move me in the way that, for example, her paintings of jars and guitars and kitchens and plants take my breath away. But these paintings have the thing that I've always loved most about Terri's work, which intellectually I describe as a kind of genius for composition, but which privately I tend to think about in terms of grace. An arrangement of mundane matter so felicitous that the beauty of it makes us see beyond what Virginia Woolf called the cotton wool of daily life. We experience what Woolf describes as the rapture of, quote, discovering what belongs to what. It is most obvious in paintings, I think, whose details are loud and colorful and abundant, like Winter Kept Us Warm and Tangle. But it's there in the more intimate paintings, too, in the gentle light and shadows and textures and baby hairs of Picnic, in the hand and the back of the ear, and I'm sorry to have to point this out, the necklines of Oh God. There is a piece of Terri in every single one of these paintings. I mean, quite literally, it's her body. But also figuratively, right? It's a bit shocking to me how cut off she is. And at first, because of how much I don't relate, I thought this was showing us Terri reduced to a part of herself, instrumentalized, mother as not person but as object. Now I see that it's actually more painful than that. These are the parts of ourselves that get severed when we let something become whole beyond us. I am so proud, sorry, if I can be permitted to be that possessive of what Terri has achieved here. I am so proud of how she has found, or really made, forced, squeezed, eked, begged, borrowed, and stolen the time to create this majestic series. Oh, I am more in awe of you than ever.
on the shelf. Okay. You guys have to present twice in 2 to 3 days. Okay. I've never done this before, so please bear with me. Hi, everybody. First, thank you so much for being here tonight. It means the world to me to see so many familiar and mostly familiar and new faces gathered here for my very first solo show. This evening honestly feels a little surreal. I've been dreaming of becoming a painter and having a show like this since I was a child. This show is called The Beginning of Devotion, a title I borrowed from Mary Oliver, who wrote that attention is the beginning of devotion. That phrase came to me early in the process of developing this series and has stayed with me as a kind of anchor. I keep returning to the word devotion, not in its sentimental sense, but as a daily, embodied, often difficult practice. This show is about the quiet rituals of care, the discipline of attention, the act of choosing to attend even when you're exhausted, unsure, or stretched thin. Motherhood for me marked the beginning of a kind of devotion I hadn't known before. To my child, yes, but also to painting, to presence, and to myself. This show is a record of what that devotion has looked like in practice over the last few years. Breastfeeding is a fraught and multifaceted topic. I do very clearly want to acknowledge that the paintings I included in the show depict what has been an overall positive experience, breastfeeding, and that this experience is not shared by everyone who tries to feed a baby. Although there were some early bumps in the road, and regularly having a set of fresh, sharp teeth around your nipples is not what I would have ever considered easy, I am lucky that my own experience with breastfeeding has been, for the most part, and completely unexpectedly, revelatory, life-affirming, and empowering. These paintings are a collection of attempts to express the excruciating intimacy and transience of breastfeeding and the development of a relationship between a mother and a child. In order to get this experience across to the viewer, I spend a great deal of time attending to the translucency and layered chroma of skin and the warmth generated by the close contact of flesh on flesh, and have tried to capture the repetitious, temporal, and sleepless nature of this practice by including lost my place, by including moments throughout the days and nights that I've spent sustaining another human being with my body. My hope is that these paintings will get you to reflect on your own experiences of caring and being cared for, and on the connection and physicality of human relationships within but also well beyond the specificity of breastfeeding and early motherhood and parenthood. People often ask, very often, how long a painting takes to complete. This question is almost impossible to answer, in part because so much of painting happens when you're not actively holding a paintbrush, but also because each of the paintings in this room was built up bit by bit in every spare moment I could steal, as Michelle mentioned. Most often when my little boy, Rowan, who was here until about an hour ago, had fallen asleep after we did bedtime, or after he'd gone to bed at night with his dad, when he was napping, during my lunch breaks at work, or during whatever weekend time I could carve out. For me, this process of layering and glazing and scumbling and massing in and wiping out has mirrored the slow but transformative accumulation of maternal experience. These are not just paintings about caregiving, they were painted through caregiving. This will end eventually, I promise. Working on this show has taught me many important lessons, not just about painting, but about patience, discipline, and trust. One of the biggest lessons was letting go of the idea that I can only paint under perfect conditions, which I know is a very popular idea. I learned that working a little every day or most days adds up to much more progress than waiting for the mythical full day of uninterrupted time that so rarely arrives. Completing a cohesive body of work has been a dream of mine for years, but I spent most of those years jumping from idea to idea before I settled on a theme that was meaningful enough to keep me hooked. The quiet, complex, often invisible experiences of early motherhood. I now know that I can stick to one idea for longer than one canvas, and that a series takes time to develop and requires continuing to show up through moments of repetition, frustration, and doubt. Perhaps most importantly, I have learned to be at least a little more okay with slowness. Parenthood forces a kind of fragmentation that can make creative work feel impossible. Louise Erdrich writes that this can cause a divided consciousness uncomfortably close to self-erasure. And Lisa Beretzer describes it as a series of unconnected experiences that remain fundamentally unable to cohere. Paradoxically, though, working in those fragments of time, which Natasha Randall calls little sips of selfhood, and having patience with my pace has led to more honest and focused work than I was able to create when I had more free time, and has resulted in a consciousness that feels increasingly undivided. I have more people to thank than I can reasonably list now without you all marching out, but I will try to fit in as many as possible before that happens. I would like to thank the Arts Council for granting me an Agility Award, which allowed me to get a private painting studio for the first time in my adult life. Jess at Greywood Arts in Cork for 2 residencies there, painting in beautiful green, peace and quiet. Deborah, Aoife, Bridget, and the rest of my friends in Parenting Artists Ireland, including Karen, for being both amazing friends and inspiring, generous, determined artists. And the Signal Arts Centre here in Bray for hosting the show, and to the staff for their warmth and help throughout the process. I am incredibly lucky to have a lot of wildly creative, insightful, supportive, hilarious, patient, brilliant friends, and I'm forever grateful to Michelle, Katrina, Emily, Eve, I'm not going to look at all of your faces at the right time, Emily, Eve, Nakama, Shirla, Joe, Ashley, Alex, Olivia, Lily, Caroline, Hannah, and Rebecca, and there are a lot of others that I'm going to be kicking myself for not mentioning over the next few days, but I wanted to say that I love you, and I'm very grateful, deeply grateful to have you in my life. I feel thankful every day for the women at Rowan's Creche and now preschool, Eva, Megan, Jess, Dee, Lisa, Shayma, Laura, and Labumbo, who have made it possible for me to work and paint, knowing in my core that he is safe and loved and getting cleverer and kinder by the day while I do so. Thanks to them. Almost there. So Rowan's dad and Rowan were here, but they had to go home because it's his bedtime, well after his bedtime. But to Rowan's dad, Rob, for believing in me as a mother and as a painter, bossing me upon request when I felt too tired or discouraged to paint, giving me unerringly correct, impeccably timed, and delicately phrased feedback on my work, making sure I have my fair share of free time to paint and to rest, and propping me up both literally and figuratively throughout the early postpartum years. He's not depicted visibly in any of these paintings, but he's implicitly present in all of them. This show would not have been possible without him. I also obviously need to thank Rowan, who's gone, for being, hopefully he's asleep, for being perfect, for making me a mother, for helping me clarify how I want to spend my time and what I want to pass on about a life well lived, for never biting me on purpose, and for so far not eating my paint. And finally, again, to all of you, thank you for coming out tonight to see these paintings in person and for being here for me. I can't tell you how much it means to me. I am deeply, deeply grateful.